Scotty Roberts is back in Grimerica after, I don't know, 10 years, maybe 8 years, 9 years. It's good to see you again. Looking forward to catching up with you.
Good to be seen, Graham. Thank you. And you too, Darren. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, well, I think we just recently became Facebook friends. So I was like, I see you on there and it looked like you were still up to some stuff. So I thought it would be good to catch up and just see how things have been going and what you've been up to these days.
Outstanding. So was that a question? What have I been up to?
Yeah, we might as well just turn that into a question.
Launch right into it. Well, let's see. I'm still married to my lovely wife, Rainey. We have 3 kids. You may have seen them at the Paradigm Symposium back in 2014 when they were much younger. They're now 9, 12, and 15.
Okay, wow.
And so they're getting older, making me feel older. And, of course, my older kids, you would have seen my older kids from my previous marriage. They're my twin daughters are 32. My son is 23.
Wow.
So that's my family. Family life is going all right. Things are going well. I'm still writing or trying to write. I have the last book published was I had done the Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, and then the Secret History of the Reptilians, and then with John Ward, we did the Exodus Reality.
Right.
All through New Page Books, which is now part of Red Wheel Wiser. Oh. And that was the last one that I had published through New Page Books. Although Michael Pye has been, bless his heart, has been writing me for about 4 years to write a couple of different books. He wants me to do an update to the Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. And he wants me to write another one on, we were discussing topics and something about that would be along the lines of something like the mushroom and the cross, kind of thing, digging into some really esoteric look at spirituality. And also on the Book of Enoch, he wanted me to write something. So I've got really 3 books I owe him. And then my agent has me working on novels for
is that the Sword in the Clay? Is that the one that you've got the Sword in the
Clay? I actually, you mean this book I have sitting right here? How did this get here? This is something different. This was proposed to me by a friend. He said, you ought to write and illustrate a book on this story. And so I'll jump into this for a second. And that's my illustration work. And this whole book is, I wrote it and illustrated it. It's kind of you'd think it's be like a kid's book with text like that. It's about 8,000 words long, and it's got a dozen paintings in it like these. And so that go along with the story. And the story is there was a guy named Will Bird who was a Canadian, lived in Nova Scotia. In World War I, he went to fight for his country. And his brother went before him, about a year and a half before him. He stayed home, worked in the wheat fields in Saskatchewan, and gets a telegram one day that his brother's killed in action in Belgium. And so he goes back and he conscripts, and they weren't going to originally allow him to join because he had broken teeth, what they call hockey teeth. So he got his teeth fixed, joined up, went over to France. And there he fought. And he wrote a book after the war. Will Bird wrote Ghosts Have Warm Hands. And it's memoirs, his memoirs of World War I. And in this story, he tells the story of a sword that he found in the clay after the bombing of Amiens, France.
Wow.
And in all the trenches, he finds this old gladius, this kind of sword right here, Roman gladius. And he puts it in his pack and he brings it back home. And sure enough, the thing is 2,000 years old. It dates to Caesar's Gallic Wars. Oh. It's still in the museum. in Nova Scotia today. And but while he was at Vimy Ridge laying barbed wire, late one night, he and his crew, they went to the trenches. They tried to grab a couple of hours sleep. And in the middle of the night, a warm hand grabs him by the hand to wake him up, then grabs his other hand and pulls him to his feet. And who should it be but his brother, who had been killed in action a year and a half earlier. And his brother looks at him and says, "Get your gear, follow me," and turns and walks down through the trench. And Will Bird's like, wait, grabs his gear, and he follows him. He can't catch up to him. And he turns into a side tunnel. And so Will turns in there, and he's not there. And he falls asleep with all his gear on, leaning against the mud wall. He's so exhausted. And a few minutes later, somebody's shaking him and waking him up, saying, "What are you doing here, man?" He says, "We thought you were dead." The trench where he had been sleeping had just been bombed, and everybody in it they were just digging out body parts. And so he tells the story to all his mates. "My dead brother saved my life." And this was his story. And so he wrote that into his book and his memoir. So I took and I wrote about that story in this book, but then also said, this sword that he finds, whose sword was that? Nobody knows. So I created a cast of characters. Nice. The three brothers, Abruzzo, I've got them as Marius Abruzzo and his two brothers, who went to fight for Julius Caesar during the Gallic Wars. Now, they are completely fictional, but I based them on, here, I'm looking for an illustration of them that I've got in the book. I based them upon just guys from Italia, who would have gone to fight for Julius Caesar. And I've got him as a centurion, and his two brothers who accompanied him. And here, this is the scene, by the way, where the ghost with warm hands.
And that's you doing those illustrations, eh?
Yeah, these are all watercolor illustrations.
Yeah, awesome.
And I thought it would be easy to flip to it here. Now I don't see it, but the picture of Mario, there it is. Here is Marius Abruzzo and his two brothers. And so I've got him as a centurion who owned this sword. And that's the fictional part of the story. I've created a cast of Roman characters to back up that particular part of the story. So it's about 8,000 words and a dozen full color paintings in it. And you can go to theswordandtheclay.com and see all about it. So
I love it.
That was probably the most recent book I've completed. Other than I did another book very similar to this called How to Be an Archaeologist. And it's through a friend who had a small publishing company. And it has not been published yet. But it's all about a little boy who finds a pipe in the river, an old meerschaum pipe about 100 years old, and runs it up to the Curiosity Oddities shop. And it sparks his interest in knowing about old things and archaeology. And he goes to Egypt, and so the whole book is how he becomes an archaeologist, how he starts working as an archaeologist, and some of his finds in the book. And I've written it all in a rhyming prose, but not poetry. It's not like roses are red, violets are blue. But like the first page, it shows a picture of him in the river, knee deep, and he's seeing the pipe, the painting, and it says, I'm going to think of how that starts so you get the idea. You were, let's see, something about, hang on just a second, why my own words are lost. Here, I want you to get just a little bit of a flavor for what that's about. And I'm going to well, it starts like this. You had no idea. You were just out to play, wading in the shallows of the river that day when a bare foot dislodged it, broke it loose from the cray. Something old pipe 100 years in the cray River. And so the whole book goes along that line. And so that was fun to write. It's a lot shorter. It's not 8,000 words. It's fully illustrated. Just waiting for that one to be published. And those aren't like, all the old stuff, that you guys all know about, the reptilians, the Nephilim, the Exodus book, and so on. So John Ward and I co-authored the book on the Exodus, which that bust back there was a bust that John had made for me. That's Senenmut, my candidate for the historical Moses out of Egyptian history. And so he had that carved from a big limestone chunk that he found in the quarries of Hatshepsut to the east or the west of Luxor. Nice. And he had that carved by a local artist, and he carried that, weighs about 30 pounds. He had that carried it in a bag all the way on the plains from Luxor to Cairo to Germany to here back in 2013. He gave that to me. So
nice.
Commemorating that book. So
it's hard to believe that all that stuff was that long ago. I remember interviewing you guys. You were on the boat in the Nile.
I know. That started, the first time I went to Egypt was 2013. And I went for about a month. And then I went the next year. We took a bunch of people with us, kind of a tour group. 2014, which would have taken place, was it just before or just after the Paradigm Symposium? I think it was just after the Paradigm Symposium.
Okay.
Wasn't
I was
it?
going to say before, but
I think
was it before?
Yeah, because I
early
think
October. Yeah.
Sell tickets.
That's right. And then I went back a couple more times after that. And so we had a good time.
So what did you and John, I mean, I remember sort of being fascinated by you and John, because I remember John's presentation still from Paradigm when it was the first time I had really heard somebody talk about symbols having kind of like an energy, or like the glyphs having like an energy or some sort of power. And I was just thinking, man, you guys must be, having such a blast in Egypt. They're looking at stuff. Did any of your sort of ideas about Egypt change, or did you find anything there that, or not find, but you know what I mean? Like
now I think you may remember some of this story that would tie into that question. Back in, you knew who Philip Coppens was.
Yeah.
He was with Ancient Aliens, and he had written several books, Belgian fellow. And he had become a pretty good friend of mine. He had written the foreword for my book on the reptilians just before the Paradigm Symposium 2012. And then he passed away like 2 months after the 2012 symposium. He got a very quick angiocarcinoma, cancer of the heart, and died rather quickly. I remember at the symposium, he was saying, Scotty, he says, I'm, if you're missing me for some reason, he says, just check my room. He says, I've been having weird things happening. I'm falling asleep. I'm not waking up. I'm going to see the doctor when I get back from the symposium. And sure enough, that's what it was. And by end of December, he was gone. And I remember when he passed away that I cried. And but it didn't end with that. It was like 4 or 5 days. Every time I would think about it, I would just weep, and it would just be running off my chin. And I remember saying, what the fuck? Why am I crying like this? Philip was a friend. We weren't getting a cottage by the seashore together or anything, but why is this treating me this way? And it wasn't until a few days in, 4 or 5 days in, I get a call from David Weatherly. You remember David Weatherly?
Yeah.
Shaman, very prolific author. And David calls me out of the blue. Scotty, how you doing? I'm good. And he says, when I told you I would get messages from the spirit, He says sometimes it would be in a song or a TV commercial or a book, and he says sometimes I would get an audible voice would speak to me. He says I was just sitting in my office 10 minutes ago and a voice said, "Call Scotty." He says, "So here I am. What's up?" And I figured it was connected, and I told him what had been going on. And of course, weeping my whole way through it. And I said, why is this doing this to me? I understand emotions. I understand the way the heart works. I said, but why has it broken me like this? And I can't figure it out. And he told me, he says, look, you're going to Egypt for the first time. So this was January of 2013, this conversation in about a week. He says, all I can tell you is this: something in Egypt is going to change your life forever. He said, go there with an open mind. That's all I know. And after I had that conversation, the whole weeping, that all stopped. It just came to an end. And it was very interesting because I had an experience in Egypt that changed. I don't know if I ever had a chance to talk with you guys about this when it happened, but it was in 2013. And we went to the tomb of Senenmut, this guy back here.
Yeah.
And John and I were standing there, and Maria was there. And
where was that? Whereabouts?
This was Luxor, Egypt. Okay. It was at, if you go to Hatshepsut's funerary temple, Deir el Bahre at Jesheru, it's called. There in Luxor, just on this side, the east side of the ridge that is on the other side of the ridge is the Valley of the Kings.
Yeah, okay,
like
okay, yeah. That's
10 or 15-minute car drive to go around to the other side.
Was
And her temple is there.
The hot air balloon ride? Was that where the hot air balloon ride was then?
Yeah, they do hot air balloon rides all over Luxor because all the old temples are all there.
Yeah. And
so we're at this tomb, and if you're looking at her temple, which is up against the Theban mountains, well, the cliff faces, and it's this low colonnaded temple you can see on a couple of tiers and these ramps that go up to it. And we're on the road leading up to that. And down on the side, the gullies, like the ditches, are these coulees that have tombs dug down into them. And up in the walls of the wall of the cliff face, it kind of crescent moons around it a little bit. And we were there at the tomb of Senenmut, this guy, one of his tombs. And I remember standing there, and John and Maria, we were going to go get coffee up at the little coffee shop up there. You know, every ancient tomb comes with a coffee shop now. And so we were going to go up there and get coffee. And I'm standing there in front of the tomb, and it was as nonchalant as I lit a cigarette, and I'm standing in the bright sunshine down in this coulee. We're about 20 feet lower than the road here. And I'm facing the tomb. And I said, so, Senenmut, this guy said, Senenmut, are you Moses? Moses, are you Senenmut? Did you even exist the way we've been taught you did? And I light this cigarette, and it's almost as if something out of left field just bombarded me. And as I'm standing there, I drop the cigarette in the sand, and I'm weeping again, and it's rolling off of my chin. And I remember distinctly yelling at it, echoing off the walls of this ditch. I'm yelling, what the fuck am I crying about? It just hit me out of nowhere again. I wasn't overcome with emotion. It was nothing like that. And so move fast forward now to about 2 months later. I'm back home. I'm talking to Phil Coppin's widow. This is all just within a month after he died. And I said, you know, I hadn't talked to you. I'm wondering if you would like to come and speak in his place next year at the symposium. And also, I said, I never told you how I reacted when Philip died. And we had a little conversation. And I told her about what happened in front of Senenmut's tomb. She said, "That's extraordinary." She said, "Did I tell you, remember at the Paradigm Symposium, I told you Philip and I might join you and John in Luxor because we were working on a book together and we were supposed to be in Luxor." Oh. And she said, "You know what that book was about? It was about the relationship between Senenmut and Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh." And I said, "Well, that's wild." And she said, "When did this happen, this experience at the tomb?" And I have my journal. It's sitting up over here somewhere. And I flipped it and I said, "Well, it was on this date, February 3rd, I think it was, of 2013, at right around noon." And she kind of gasped and she said, "Do you know what happened to me that same exact day?" He said, "Philip's brother was leading a tour with me, and we were in Scotland, and we were sitting in our hotel room and having coffee." She said, "And Philip appeared, physical, ghostly manifestation, right in front of us, moved something on the table and vanished." At the same time, I was having this experience at the tomb of Senenmut, whom she said they were supposed to be there writing a book on this because Philip believed he was a reincarnation of Senenmut.
Wow.
And so all these little pieces seemed like there was something going on. And there was all kinds of things that have happened since then that seems to have verified it. It's interesting that that same trip, John and I went up to Saqqara, where the stepped pyramid of Djoser is. This was like the next week or a couple of weeks out. And alongside the stepped pyramid is this courtyard. It's called the Hebsed Court. If you look at a map of it, you'd see this like long, narrow courtyard with these little shrine temples on each side. And over here is the stepped pyramid, right off this court, the corner of the court. And so we're over there and we're digging around, and there were no tourists. The only people there were the Egyptian guardians, and these men that are all dressed in the local village color, the long gelabehs, the robes that hang to the ground, and the long sleeved white and blue and colors like that and gray. So we're there all by ourselves. We're just kind of digging around. Once again, I'm sitting on a stone at the end of this courtyard. I'm having a cigarette in the sun. And everything is in ruins. It's cleaned up, but it's ruined. And on the sides were 7 or 8 of these. They were tall, cove-topped shrines that sat all along the sides of this courtyard, facing into the courtyard. And these long shrines with little porches in front of each one. Now, 3 of them have been reconstructed, and the rest are rubble, and they're all neatly stacked in rows as like an outdoor museum in that courtyard. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this. John's over there looking around at hieroglyphics, and right in front of my eyes, everything changed. All the rubble was gone. All the temples were built fully. Out of the front piece of each one of these temples, way up at the top, were long torches that were all lit. There were long shadows being cast from the west. It was close to sunset. I could feel the breeze. I could smell incense burning. I could hear chanting. And walking toward me in this long, narrow courtyard were priests, what I interpret as priests. They were all bare-chested, bald, white kilts, all carrying trays of things. And they're walking like they're marching, but very slow, a ceremonial, slow march. And they're chanting, and they're walking toward me. And about 20 feet away from me, one by one, they turn to the other side of the courtyard, and they're moving this way. And as that's going on, I blink, and it's all gone again. I'm back in the ruins, and eyes full of tears. Now I'm not crying. It's that thing you get when you get the chills that run really bad up the back and the backs of your arms. You go, whoa, and your eyes water up. It was like that. I'm like, whoa, what was that? Another for the third time. What the fuck was that? And I am not given to visions, and I everything that I believe or act on or talk about that's in that spiritual realm, I try to keep it as common sense as I can and say, look, there's explanations. Look, there is supernatural things happen, but I'm not given to some of that stuff. So I don't like to say, well, I had a vision today. So, but that's all I could chalk it up to. And what was interesting about that is that there were so many things after that and later, and even a year later when we were back at that same site, I had Chris Conway. He's a Scottish psychic medium. He was on the British show Most Haunted, the one where all the women scream all the time. He did a couple of seasons on that show as their medium. But he came along, friend of John's and mine, and he did a lot of defining of what I had seen the year before. Now, what's really interesting, I'm going to jump. I don't know if you can hear the dogs. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay.
It would have been, that was 2013 when that happened at that courtyard by the Step Pyramid. About 4 years ago, I had a friend who was going to Egypt, going to go to Saqqara, and I was sharing with her like this on a program here that she could see some of the pictures I took of that courtyard. And as we're scanning through, and all of a sudden from behind the rocks, I was standing on one of the porches looking back toward where I had been sitting when I had this little vision. And way off to the left, coming out from behind the stonework, is this big black silhouetted figure, broad daylight. Now, he was cut off just before you'd see the face. You see a little bit of the ear, but you see the shoulder and you see the chest muscle, and it goes down to the hip, and his arm is hanging with his hand hanging open like this. And he's coming out from behind the stonework, but very dark. And nobody there that was on site looked like that. There would have been no man with dark skin emerging without a shirt in the desert sun. And then when you look at the picture, you can say where he is, you look at where he is compared to everything in the picture, he would have been about 8 or 9 feet off the ground. And so this picture showed up about 4 years ago. It had been 7 years since I had taken that picture. So it was 2020 that I saw the picture. I took the picture in 2013. I had never seen that image in the picture before. And he's only in one picture. I took a picture that way, the one he's appearing in. Then a couple seconds later, I stood down onto the ground level of the courtyard and took a picture where he would have been coming from. Nobody there. So it was an interesting bunch of circumstances there. Don't know what that was, who it was. That picture can be seen. It's over on my Instagram. If you scroll back, the story is written there. There's a bunch of pictures in my Instagram page. But that event, it was very interesting that picture showed up, that all kinds of little spiritual things have happened, supernatural happenings around my house, my family. There was one time, it was before I had seen the picture, but it was the year after that. I think you may remember this because John and I talked about it at the 2014 Paradigm Symposium where you guys were. And we had gone the week before with Rocky Stucci, and we had investigated a house in Minneapolis, paranormal, haunted house. And we got all those weird recordings, the big bang. I don't know if you remember that story. We're sitting in the basement with a spirit box, and the whole house goes bang and just shakes. We're like, what up? And you can hear John. It's on the recording. He had left his recorder up on the kitchen counter. you hear us all scrambling up the stairs because I stood up and I go, hello. I go, upstairs. And we go running up the stairs. John's behind me. Rocky's the third. And he goes, wait, shit. Don't leave me down here or something. And John is like, get me out of this fucking house, he says. And so we make it upstairs. There's nothing out of place. The house is empty. And we play back this recording that night to see if we picked anything up.
No bang.
And you hear, and Rocky had also a system set up with the two mics and a stereo sound recording. And as we play that back, you hear all of us scrambling up the stairs after this big bang. The bang went tick, 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 bang, like that. And we could find nothing out of place. We asked if anybody's here, who's here? Would you like to talk to us? And you hear what we refer to as the huffing that picked up on the stereo speakers. It goes, welcome, just like that, as an EVP. We didn't hear that. It was on the recording. And it moved from right to left in the stereo. And we got a bunch of other stuff, too. But
did you hear the bang on the? Did you hear the bang?
Yeah, the bang was there.
Oh, was it?
Man, it's I've got it here. I don't know if I could play it so you could hear it, but it was extraordinary. Now, Barry Fitzgerald, who was the Irishman on, you'd seen him a lot on Ghost Hunters. Then he was the lead investigator, I believe, on Ghost Hunters International. This is how long ago this is now. This is back a few years, and he and John were both staying at my house for the Paradigm Symposium 2014 that you guys attended. And we told Barry this story because it had just happened a few days earlier. And he says, the only thing he thought was that, he says, it's like what I like to call a spiritual sonic boom. He says, it's like there is so much spirit energy buildup, it releases, bang, and it's out. Then it's like it calms. It's like having a fart or something, and it's like, it's done. And you go, whoa, I feel better now. And so that was his explanation for it. But we do have that on recording. We also have a couple of voices that talk to us. We were in a house that everything was empty, wood floors. They were repainting the house, going to sell it. It's the oldest house in the Minneapolis inner city lakes district. There's a chain for a few miles of lakes where all the rich folks built their big houses and stuff like that. It's all inner city in Minneapolis. And this was one of the original houses there, built in the 1850s. And old Fort Snelling, which was about 20 miles away in Minneapolis now. It's a 20-minute car drive. Back then, it was a day's march. And they would stop at this house, was like a popular roadhouse and all that implies. And John was picking up brothel and all of this stuff. And we had a couple of voices talking over John and me at one point. John was kind of joking, and he says, yes, right over here. He says, I get an image of a woman. She's dressed in red. And he says, there's a bed there. And he says, she's riding him. And is the way John put it. And I go, oh, she's riding him. And we did our boy locker room chuckling about that. And as we're saying that, a voice over us on the EVP goes, shh, shh, shooing us. And then two men talking to each other. One of them says something we cannot understand. We've tried to decipher it. It's a different language. It sounds like it's not French. It's not French Canadian. It's not. But he's like, it had this cadence of, and the other guy goes, Mandu. So, so you're very French. Mandu. You can see him going, So, my God. So they were commenting about what we were commenting about. And then we found out the house was built by French Canadians in the 1850s. So interesting stuff. But your original question was, and look how long I've blethered on about it, about experiences in Egypt, spirituality, all kinds of things. And some of this stuff all sourced in things that happened to me in Egypt. There was one day, I'll tell you this real quickie. Their archaeological site spans both sides of the Nile down about 100 or so miles south of Luxor, just before you get to Komombo. It's one of the narrowest pinches on the Nile.
Okay.
Still pretty wide. It takes you 5 minutes on a ferry boat to cross, but you couldn't throw a quarter across. But their dig house was on a big old boat, a big old dahabeah, and which had all the cabins down below deck and the staterooms, and then the open upper deck, and they'd put up the poles and the canvas roofs, and all the bookshelves were out there. Different climate. You don't even think about it. Well, it might rain or snow. No, probably not. And so that was the dig house. And so one afternoon, one of the Egyptian workers from one of the villages around comes running in off the shore, up the narrow little gangplank, just screaming, yelling that he had just seen a jinn in the crags and the cliffs alongside the Nile. And he came running in, and within 5 minutes, almost every other Egyptian worker came running up that gangplank. They all went down into the hold where they slept at night, smoked shisha till the next morning. They would not go back out of the boat. They would not go back on the shore because they saw a jinn. And John said something about a jinn, and we were taking night pictures from the deck, trying to see if I could capture anything on film, which I didn't. But there is some thinking on my part that character that I picked up in Saqqara, the black figure, may have been jinn. And David Weatherly, after the fact, once I saw the picture, he says, I think you may have jinn there. And that's my strong feeling about it. So
what about the vision, the priests with the censers or the incense, the breeze, all that, like that procession? I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing to have a vision of, I wonder what that is. Any intuition about that?
About the actual scene I was viewing, no, I didn't get too much, other than a year later, it was Chris Conway, our Scottish medium friend, who was there with me, and he was sitting on that same stone with me. I didn't tell him exactly what had happened, but he said, on that site, I said, something happened here a year ago. And he said, well, he says, I'm in his Scottish accent, he says, I'm getting a man that ancient man that wants to talk to you. He says, and he said, he's naked. And I said, oh. I said, is that good or bad? And I said, do you think maybe, is he in a loincloth or something? You go, well, that's it. It's like a nappy, he said, diaper. And I said, I don't know what's worse, a naked ancient man or a naked ancient man with a diaper on. And he said that this man is somebody who served on this site higher up. He said like a physician or an historian. So it was something like that was not just your typical servant, a step above. And he said he's not giving me his name because he said he doesn't want to reveal that to you until he knows he can trust you. But he is connected to you. He is connected to you because he said you think the way he thinks.
Wow. And
it's interesting. And all of that stuff you take with a little bit of a grain of salt. You want to be practical. You want to be, common sense, even a little skeptical. Chris Conway, I trust him, but at the same time, I go, is this what he's really seeing? And you just want to be practical about it. And Chris had said he will never leave. He says he'll never leave Egypt, but he'll be connected to you or attached to you anytime you're here. And it was interesting because later in that same trip, he gave us his name, which I can't remember. It was confusing. But Chris gave us the name, and we were again at the Temple of Hatshepsut a week later. And Chris said, I've seen your man again. He's here. He's offering you like a big ruby, like the size of a saucer with a gold edging on it. And he's wearing a robe this time, and he's handing this to you. and he's giving you his name, and he's trying to pronounce it. And we told John a few minutes later, and John's eyes went wide, and he says, "Where did you get that name?" He says, "No one should know that name." And it was connected with the ancient Hermetic Order of Luxor.
Wow.
And then we told him about the ruby, and he says, he was basically like, no, go fuck yourself. You did not see a ruby. And there was one of the old explorers in the 1800s had found, they would ship, all these rich guys would ship all these goods home. They would just rob Egypt blind of its antiquities. And there was a ruby that he had found that was the symbol of this new revived Hermetic Order of Luxor. But the ship went down, of course, somewhere on its way back to Germany or something, and through the Mediterranean. And so the ship was lost. And he said, they've been looking for this ruby for 100 years. And he says, and he's offering you this ruby? And it was significant only because the connection between the ruby story and the ruby being offered. And so, and the name. Well, now what's also interesting, that night that we went it was a few months later when we went to that house where we got the big recordings, the Big Bang. We're driving there, and Rocky, he's driving, and he says to John and I, he says, if you two want to, like pray or something, offer up a prayer of protection or something, I don't know what we're going to encounter tonight. So we had some silence, and I'm sitting in the front seat, passenger seat, and I remember sitting there, and I was thinking, I said to this person, I said, I don't remember your name, how to pronounce it. I said, but Chris told me that you would never leave Egypt. I said, but can you hear me? I said, are you somebody that has the ability to offer protection? And this is all in my head. At the same time, when you do this stuff, you're going, I don't know if I really believe what I'm doing here, but I'm doing it anyway. I'm asking. And I'm sitting in the front seat, and sometimes you can get into like a self-trance. Everything seems so focused here, and it was like heavy here, and I'm just experiencing. I could open my eyes and have said, yeah, turn here if I wanted to, but I'm right in the thick of this, and what I felt when I asked, do you have the ability to offer protection? And I felt, these Egyptian statues, you see that one where his head is coming out of the pedestal, and there's actually, you can't see it from this angle. There's another little head, the Princess Nefertari is right below his chin here on that statue back there. And you remember the old statues where they show those, and they would show like a figure with his arms around the child and things like that. I suddenly felt, I'm getting chills all up my back just reciting this story as I'm sitting in the chair in the seat, and I feel like someone's behind me, and their chin is on top of my head, and their arms come around my shoulders like this as I'm asking for protection. And I say this and I repeat that story, and some people will hear that and go, whatever. And I would be a guy that goes, whatever, boy, have you got an active imagination? What are you smoking? And but I felt it. I felt the physical, which was extraordinary to me, because I had never, everything extraordinary I have ever experienced on a spiritual level
wasn't
all
physical.
started in Egypt.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah.
And it started with this particular presence.
Yeah.
And so every now and then, I've been very silent on this stuff for a long time, but every now and then I can, if I think about it, I can pick things up. I can see things happen, see things move. I've got this set of, I don't know if I've got it sitting right here right now or not, or I may have moved it. The divining rods that John had made for me in Luxor. Just iron, and I'll use those sometimes and call out. to him. They were sitting right there, I thought, but I must have moved them. And yes, is the answer to your question.
That's fascinating. I mean, so over the last 10 years, has your view on religion and occultism changed at all? I mean, because we've seen a lot of people kind of move toward Christ, some of our past guests, like
Yeah.
a lot of big past guests, but we know sort of
Sure.
you have that background. But also
Yes.
we've also seen, of course, like an interest in occultism. Like occultism has pretty much gone mainstream
Yeah.
since we last talked to you. I mean, so much has changed. So
Yeah.
has your view at all changed on any of that stuff?
I have been, as you know, and you just made quick reference to, I attended Bible college and theological seminary back, my God, almost 40 years ago, 35 years ago. And I was in ministry. I was a youth pastor. I was in a fundamental conservative Baptist church. And somewhere along the way in there, I had been disillusioned by a few things, and mostly people and politics. And I stepped away. I kind of pushed it away. And over the years, I have found myself more and more questioning some of the tenets of that faith. It would be like I would get really turned off when I'd hear somebody talking the Christian language. Come to Jesus. Jesus' arms are open to take you. He will save you, and he will save you from your sin, and the whole litany, the whole line down. And I'm like, oh, don't. It almost gives me. I want to push that away. It doesn't sound right anymore. But then I'll get the other side of that, where somebody will go, "Oh, the Bible, it's all a book of myths and this." And I go, "Now wait a minute, dumbass. It's not. Have you done any study at all? Do you know anything at all? That book is as efficaciously sound historically. Now, theology you can take or leave, but the history of the Bible is so proven over and over and over again that, and so I take two sides to that is my point with that. And so I'm not into the occult. I haven't stepped into that at all, although I know a lot of people. I've probably done some things that my Christian friends would say, "Oh, get thee behind me, Satan."
Well, I mean, ghost hunting and talking to Jinn or talking to,
yes,
whatever. It could
that's all,
right? I mean, because it's,
yeah. So, and that's, and I tell people, you know what? I do the ghost hunting or the investigating. I look into this stuff. I speak an awful lot about esoterics and about occultism, mythology. But I question a lot of things. One of the things, and you and I have probably talked about this in our distant past relationship together, but when I wrote the book on the Nephilim and then followed it up with the one on the reptilians, there were some things I mentioned in there about how I firmly believe Moses penned the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. I don't for a minute believe he did not exist. He was a guy just like Plutarch was a guy, or Pliny the Elder. They were all guys in history. Just because he's connected with theological history doesn't mean he didn't exist. And I think there's plenty of evidence that he existed. And he, according to the dating system and the research I did for the book that we wrote on the Exodus reality, I believe that he would have penned the first 5 books of the Bible sometime between 1450 and 1400 BCE, in that 40-year span, when they had left Egypt and then gone to the Promised Land, but were wandering for 40 years. Now, all that to say, there are things that he wrote about Genesis, about the Nephilim, about all these characters in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 1. For the next 4 verses, they talk about the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And what he's referencing, a much longer passage on that, can be found if you go to the book of Enoch. Now, Enoch has a whole book dedicated to what Moses talked about in about 4 verses. And people say, oh, the book of Enoch, well, that only dates back to about 400 or 500 BC. Well, you know what? So does the whole Old Testament, because in between 400 and 500 BCE, the children of Israel who had gone back to Israel after being in captivity in Babylon went and asked permission of Ptolemy II of Egypt if they could go to the Library of Alexandria with a bunch of their priests and reconstruct the scriptures, which all they had was oral tradition. They wanted to reconstruct and find everything. Imagine what that library was like. They go there, they find out all the old scrolls, everything about their culture, they rebuild it. And that's the Old Testament. If you pick up a Bible today, the Old Testament is a translated version of the Septuagint, which is what they penned in 400 to 500 BCE. Along with that, also the book of Enoch was one of the apocryphal books, now later declared an apocryphal book by the Catholic Church. And so the book of Enoch existed at the same time. And Moses, I think, took a lot of information. Remember, if he grew up in Egypt as a prince of Egypt, and this man behind me held 92 royal titles given to him by the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, who I believe was the woman who the Bible mentions as the daughter of Pharaoh who finds Moses in the Nile. And there's only 2 women, I believe, in Egyptian history in the New Kingdom that bore the title of Pharaoh's daughter. It was a title. Hatshepsut, her birth name Matkare, was one of them. And so she would have named, and the name Senenmut, by the way, in Egyptian means mother's brother. I, your mother, am elevating you to status of brother to the gods with me. But we all know that Senenmut, it was known that he was not of royal birth, that I don't know if they knew he was Hebrew, but I don't think there's any, the movies make a big deal out of it. I don't think they cared back then. It all cared on what the pharaohs said. And she was his stepson, I believe. Now, I only bring that up because he would have had one of the best educations of his day. Growing up in the palace, growing up with the one of his titles was the Crown Prince of Egypt. He was the Grand Royal Architect. He was the Grand Vizier and the High Priest of Amun. All of these things, 92 titles.
Professor Bauer's in the chat, if I can interrupt you.
All right, Professor Bauer, how you doing?
I think I heard him on one of your recent episodes that I want to make sure you get to plug your YouTube channel there. Hey, Professor Bauer. Yeah, that was very interesting, actually. I think you were talking about the Great Reset on that one.
Yes, that was Monday night.
He says Moses was a constructed character based on Zoroastrianism.
You tell him I said that's utter bullshit.
That's utter bullshit.
So, that's a very fine theory, Professor Bauer, but it's bullshit. So,
well, I gotta ask you, with all the knowledge, because a lot of people, I just started reading the Bible again. I didn't even get that far. I think I just got through Genesis. It's fucking long, man.
It is,
and it's interesting to go back into it, kind of with everything I know now. But a lot of people I know are talking about Revelation, about signs of this, signs of that, and I figure you're the guy to ask. Do you see any sort of signs that we're heading into Revelation right now? And I'm curious. You're probably one of the most credentialed theologian guys I know.
Back when I was in high school in the 1970s, we were talking about those days looking like the end times of Revelation. And, you go to Revelation, you go to the book of Daniel, you go to the book of Isaiah, Ezekiel, you're going to see all kinds of things on the end times, or the study of eschatology. And there are many different Christian sects that believe all different kinds of things about the timeline of the end times, what's supposed to happen, what's going to happen, so on, so on, so on. And, you've heard of things because it gets talked about an awful lot, erroneously for what it is mentioned in the books of the Bible, but the rapture, the coming of Jesus to take up all the believers, rapture them out of the world, and then that ushers in the 7 years of great tribulation where there is no Spirit of God left on the earth. The Holy Spirit is withdrawn. This is the first 3.5 years of that is the rise of who they call the Antichrist. But that we think this evil, and maybe he's evil innate or evil works through him, but he ends up being, he's a very charismatic man, whoever this ruler is, if it's even a single guy. But it says the whole world would look to him as being the savior of the world, not in the sense of a Messiah, but a metaphoric savior. He's going to give us peace. He's going to give us safety. He's going to make the world work right when there's wars and rumors of wars and all of this. He's going to reestablish temple worship in Jerusalem, according to the book of Revelation. Now, what would happen for temple worship to have to take place? The Dome of the Rock would have to be gone, and the temple would be rebuilt on the old platform. You can see what would happen if that were tried today. So I see things that are prophetic things that are supposed to take place in that end times that you look at it right now and you go, that ain't happening today, but could an event happen tomorrow that would change everything? Maybe. I don't know. But then, so this whole prophetic calendar thing, all these signs, the Euphrates drying up and things like that. Well, has the Euphrates ever dried up before? Yeah, it's not fully dry now, but it's receded. Is that a sign of the end times, or is that a sign of it's really dry the last decade? It's things like that. I like to look at back when I was in junior high school, middle school in the mid-70s. Our youth pastor said, it all looks really good today for the end times and the return of Christ. But I loved the way he said this. He says, but God could always reshuffle the deck. Now, that was almost 50 years ago. That was 50 years ago. Things have changed.
Yeah.
So the stuff going on now,
it's pretty next level. I mean, without getting too political or too into it, it's pretty.
Yeah.
I mean, if I would have told you this shit was going to happen 10 years ago, everything all the shit we've been through in the last 4 years, you'd have been your fucking nuts, man. There's no way.
If you'd have told me 10 years ago that anti-Semitism would be on the rise in the United States, I tell you, you're absolutely nuts, because Israel is one of our greatest allies in the Middle East. And there's a lot of spiritual belief that a lot of people hold that would still adhere to Israel being a chosen people or somebody we should be allied to, that we should be aligned with. And so you see things change pretty quick over the last year. Israel's attacked, the greatest loss of life since the Holocaust itself 80 years ago. And you've got people crying for Israel being the ones trying to commit genocide? Are you fucking kidding me? Not to turn it political, but how can anyone possibly in this country, in the Western world, you guys are in Canada, how can they believe that Israel is committing genocide? Israel is doing what either of our countries would do if we were attacked. Do you fight a war to win a war, or do you fight a war to say, well, we've kind of settled you down for a while? No, you fight a war to win. And I think what Israel is doing is saying, look, this has been going on for almost the entire 75 to 80 years of our existence. This is it. They killed 1,900 people in one day, committed atrocities. People forget that. And they're going to put it to bed. But what you've got is Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, which we're funding in the United States. We won't get into politics, I promise. But you've got all this stuff on the college campuses and all of that. They found a place to get a foothold. And the place they're getting a foothold is in the minds of mushy, non-critically thinking, non-thinking students. And is
it's
that
time
a
for a
sign
new
of the
red-
times?
Time for a new Red Scare.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Is that a sign of the times? Maybe. That the world would become anti-Semitic. Doesn't the book of Revelation speaks of how the entire world is going to converge against Israel in war? They talk about the kings from the Gog from Magog, prophetic language. All these countries from the north would converge down onto Israel. Egypt from the south. All these countries converging. Now, it doesn't mention the United States. I remember we used to have one of our pastors said maybe it's because the United States no longer exists at the time of the end times. I don't know. Or it just wasn't seen. So Israel's in the hot spot right now. They have everybody around them moving on them. Is that a sign of the end times?
So then the
It could
Antichrist is
be.
supposed to solve that problem, isn't he?
Who? The Antichrist?
Yeah.
The Antichrist
Theoretically would
brings
solve that.
peace. People say all over the world, according to the scripture, will say, now there will be peace and safety because he puts it all to an end. And it's not just somebody bringing peace. It's somebody who sets up the whole world system so it works in favor of allowing Israel to rebuild their temple, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Any candidates?
Candidates. Oh, a candidate?
Or candidate or two for the Antichrist? Any guesses?
Do I have a candidate? No, I don't actually. Because first of all, he's going to be somebody that rises out of the 10-headed beast, according to the picturesque language in Revelation. He's a ruler of one of those nations. And people used to say, well, that's NATO. Obviously, there's 10 nations in NATO. Well, until they add Sweden and, whoever else, Ukraine. But he rises up. He has great charisma. He wins the people's heart. He's somebody that the whole world knows and loves. And that he will establish a peace and a safety for the world. And everybody will see that and go, this is the guy. This is the man. And people aren't going to see him as the Antichrist. That's a metaphoric title that's put on him. He's somebody that's working against the things of the Christ. And but what's interesting about that too is that there is some theological theories based on things that are written that the Antichrist is also going to be somebody who rises up out of Judaism. He's somebody who could name his Jewish tribe that he was born into. And, like you had the 12 tribes, and the Levites or the priestly tribe, all these different, the tribe of Judah, which was the tribe that Jesus was born into, King David. And so all of these things are going to have to take place for it to be the perfect picture of what the Bible says is the Antichrist. So then you got to start thinking, is maybe it all a little more metaphoric than we think it is? So that's what's interesting. Is it a metaphor for what's going on? Has it become a metaphor? Has it turned into a metaphor? The other night when we were talking, Professor Bauer and I, and we were talking about contingent dualism was something that a theory on something we had when I was in seminary. This can happen only if this happens. If this doesn't happen, then it's got to happen a different way. It's contingent dualism, a dualistic outcome based on the contingency of whether or not this forerunning thing happens first. And I think that's what is going to determine what's going on in the end times is this going to happen or does this not happen? You look at the timelines of biblical history. It all seems to be in these 2,000-year segments of time. Adam to, I think it was Noah. No, it wasn't Adam to Noah. I think it was there was the Adamic covenant. Then there was the Noahic covenant. Then there was the Abrahamic covenant. Then there was the, if you will, the Christian covenant, the New Testament, the New Covenant. And then 2,000 years later would be then the end times, if that's the way it works. But it's also not a perfect thing. I think they said from Adam to Noah was 2,000 years. Noah to Abraham was 2,000 years. Abraham to Jesus was 2,000 years. Or David. And then David to Jesus. No, it's only 1,000 years. So yeah, Abraham to Jesus, then Jesus to the end times. They're saying they're all 2,000 year cycles. Well, we're right smack there, if that's what it is. So I don't know. What it really comes down to is I really don't know. And I don't know what to trust in what's written. I don't know how to interpret all of it. I know that there is a verse that people would quote a lot from the New Testament, says, no man will know when exactly all of this stuff is going to take place, but you will know the times and the seasons. And so are we in a place where we're starting to recognize, looks like the season of the witch, the season of the Antichrist, the season of the end times? Is that going to happen, or is God going to reshuffle the deck again? I don't know.
There you go. God shuffled his feet. Scotty Roberts, this has been fantastic. Where can people find all your stuff?
You can find me mostly through my website. It's my full name, Scott Alan Roberts, and Alan is spelled A-L-A-N because there's 10 ways to spell Alan. ScottAlanRoberts.com. You can find links to everything else, all my social media sites, my YouTube, and all of that stuff is all on there.
Well, let's
right on. Hey, is that a picture of Blavatsky behind you there? Is that her?
Oh, up there?
Yeah.
No, that's a picture my one of my daughters drew for me. It's pencil.
Oh, wow.
It's Samwise Gamgee's and Frodo.
Oh, that's interesting.
From the movies.
Now I see it.
So.
Now I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So she did that for me.
Don't tell her. Don't tell her.
A few years ago.
Don't tell her I thought it was Helena.
Oh, I won't. Hard to see on these little screens.
Man? I mean, you're the
last. Did we talk for an hour already?
Yeah.
An hour and 10 minutes. Yeah. Time flies. Let's not wait 10 years to do this again.
Yeah. Let's do it again.
Let's not.
Yeah.
Let's do it again anytime you want.
Yeah. Thanks for the stories.
We'll have you on our Outlawed show and we'll get political as fuck.
Yeah.
But yeah. Elections coming up in 2 weeks. Going to be exciting.
Yeah.
It'll be cast things in a totally different light again, depending on who wins.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
There we go. Scotty Roberts.
Everybody take care.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me.
Okay.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah. And that was our chat. Scotty Roberts. What'd you think?
Long time. That flew by. Yeah. I love the stories from Egypt. Oh, man.
Yeah, the Egypt thing was great. Yeah, that was a great I don't know if I remember. I do remember some of that stuff from the Paradigm Symposium. Like I think maybe the bang and stuff like that. So yeah, what a great story. Especially after being there. And going through
that. We didn't get the chance to tell him that we were there a couple of years ago, and it's just because we were in that courtyard. I was going to ask you about that
courtyard. Yeah, man. What's her name? Well, that's where Jen almost passed out because it was like that's where it was like crazy hot, and we had already gone through a bunch of stuff when we were going through, and then everyone wanted to go pick through the courtyard to go look at all this stuff, and then it was like so hot, people were like getting ready to keel over. I mean, that's the thing to get used to. It's like it's hot as fuck and dry, super dry. It's a dry heat. So big thanks to Scotty Roberts for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you're one of the few who choose to be noble in the Grimerica ranks by supporting us. Grimerica.ca/support. Sign up for a monthly or make a one-time donation. You do that to the tune of $1,000, and you can be a lord of Grimerica. We'll give you some land and a title, and we'll read all your notes. So it's worth it, pays off in the end. America.ca/support. Sign up today. We can't do it without you. Of course, head over to adultbrain.ca. Check out all those podcasts we got. We also got, we haven't put it on the website yet, but we've actually started publishing some books, some ebooks, and some nice newly formatted books to go along with our collection. Because a lot of these books you can just get in an old shitty form, so we were remastering them and put them all out again through Adult Brain. So adultbrain.ca to follow that stuff. Or AmericaOutlaw.ca, like we were talking about with Scotty Roberts, where we get political, where we we get off the rails sometimes. Could have got off the rails on that conversation for sure, but we didn't. But AmericaOutlaw.ca. Contact at the cabin for the trip. Speaking of things in 2 weeks, if you want to ignore that American election, we're going to be just hanging out for it. I think is it the 4th or when's the election?
I don't know, man. The 5th,
We
maybe?
might be like on the mountain for the
Is it
election.
the 5th?
If
No,
not,
I think it's 2 days after. I think we're 2 days after the election. So
there you go. Contact at thecabin.com if you want to come and hang out with us and Brandon Powell and a bunch of cool people up on the mountain here in Canada, eat some moose, and we'll have a time. So check that out. Contact at thecabin.com. Spam Graham at gramerica.com. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.